Hello, friends. Welcome to Literary Concepts. Today's topic is the post-war period, which started in 1945 and continued up to 1960s. Now, let us try to learn more about the post-war period. The post-war period in English literature approximately started from 1945 and continued up to the late 1960s. This post-war period represents presenting a transformative era. Where that we find there is a transformation, there are the changes happened during this era because of the result, the aftermath of the World War II, the effect of the World War II, we find many changes during post-war time. The aspects like, the trauma of the war, that is the distress and disturbing scenarios of the war, such as Holocaust event, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, and the displacement of millions left an indelible mark, mark on the literary imagination. The trauma of the war, understand the distress and disturbing scenarios of the war, like Holocaust, Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, and the displacement of millions of people had a strong influence on the literary creation during the post-war period. This period is marked as a critical juncture in literary history. In the history of literature, we find it as a critical time, critical point. Where that we find both continuation of modernist experimentation and growing shift towards existentialist, realist, and socially engaged writing. The modernist experimentation aspects and the shift towards existentialism theory, realistic, and socially engaged writings we find during the post war period. The writers of the post war time grapple the fight with the collapse of ideological certainties, the downfall of ideological certainties, the erosion of religious faith, that is, the degradation of religious faith, and the dehumanizing effects of mechanized warfare. Understand the dehumanizing effects because of the battlefield, because of the World War II, which raised questions like questions about human nature, morality, and the meaning of existence. These aspects we find in the writings of the post-war time. The writers focused on these aspects. As a result of this, the post-war literature reflects. In the post-war literature, we find uh, deeply introspective, morally complex, and often dark in tone. The post-war literature is a introspective in tone, morally complex, very difficult to understand, and as well as in tone is also we find that sad and negative aspects. Now let us try to understand the characteristics of post-war literature. The first one is existential angst and absurdism. Existential angst means a feeling of anxiety, a feeling of uneasiness, unease. Absurdism means meaninglessness, purposeless. There is no purpose, there is no meaning at all. The post war literature absorbed, they fully interested in the influence of existentialist philosophy. They uh, had that influence of the existentialist philosophy, and particularly the works of Jean Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. They both were French philosophers. The works of Jean Paul Sartre and Albert Camus' works had a more influence on the post-war writers. So where that they focus on meaninglessness, absurdity, and individual search for purpose. Individual search for the purpose in a fragmented, in a disintegrated world. So we find these aspects, that is meaninglessness, absurdity, and individual search for purpose in the works of post-war writers. Next characteristic is disillusionment and trauma. Disillusionment means a feeling of disappointment and trauma, that is distress, hurting scenes. We find okay, the reflections on war horrors. Okay, because of World War II, we find the horrifying scenes and scenarios and the human sufferings, a loss of faith in civilization and progress. So these aspects we find in the post-war literature. The next characteristic is moral ambiguity. So that is ambiguity means uncertainty, inexactness. There is no certainty. So in the characteristics, okay, in the characters of post-war literature, we oftenly find the morally complex nature. Okay, so where that we find right and wrong are not clearly defined, good and bad, or right and wrong are not clearly defined, are not clearly depicted in the characters of the uh, post-war works. Okay, so therefore we find that moral ambiguity as a one of the concept or theme characteristic of the post-war literature. The next characteristic is alienation and identity crisis. So alienation, so that is isolation and separation. So individuals, due to the war horrifying scenarios, the effect of the war, World War II, so individuals feel isolated. They were separated and disconnected from the society and themselves. So this alienation and identity crisis theme is also the recurring point in the works of post-war literature. The next characteristic is realism and the psychological depth. Realism means accepting the reality or practicality and accepting the truthfulness. So writers often explode the gray areas, the dull areas of human behavior. So where that they focused on internal psychological struggles and external social conditions. So the writers they focused more on the internal psychological feelings and external social conditions in their writings. So the next characteristic is influence of war. So the World War II, the effects of the World War II, the result of World War II. So war is a recurring theme, motive. Motive means theme or idea or concept which it often served as a backdrop. The war was a backdrop of the work, or the war's influence, we direct influence we find on characters' behavior and plot. So the war's direct influence we find in the characters' behavior and the plot in the works of the post-war literature. The next characteristic is social realism and class consciousness. Particularly in Britain, post war literature gave rise to angry young men. So, in Britain, we find so a Angry Young Men group, a group of writers who focused more on the frustrations of working class and the inadequacies of the British class system, that is, the demerits of the British class system, disadvantages of the British class, the shortages of the British class system. So the literature became a vehicle for them. Understand? So the literature became a vehicle for an angry young men group of writers where that they gave social commentary and portrayed ordinary lives with honesty and often with biting satire. Understand? We find uh, the literature has become as a vehicle, so to give social commentary, social criticism, so their comments on the society, as well as they depicted, they portrayed the ordinary, the common lives of people, the common life of people with honesty, and often that we find the biting, the sharp satire and criticism in their works. So these are the important characteristics of the post-war period. Now let us try to understand some of the major writers and their works of post-war period. The first writer is George Orwell. His important works are 1984, which was published in 1949. Okay, and the one next work is Animal Farm, which was published in 1945. So, in his works, we find the themes like totalitarianism, surveillance, and dystopia. Dystopia. These themes we find in the works of George Orwell. The next writer is Graham Greene. Okay, his important works are The Heart of the Matter, which was published in 1948, and The End of the Affair, which was published in 1951. So, in Graham Greene's works, we find the concepts and ideas like themes like moral dilemmas, politics, Catholic guilt. So, these aspects, so these themes we find in the works of Graham Greene. The next writer is William Golding. His important work, very famous work, is Lord of the Flies, which was published in 1954. So, in his work, where that we find the themes like human savagery, loss of innocence. So, these themes we find in the Lord of Flies, okay, in the works of William Golding. The next writer is Samuel Beckett. So his important works are Waiting for Godot, which was published in 1953, and Endgame. So these two are the important works of Samuel Beckett. So in his works, we find the themes like absurdism, existential despair. So these themes we find in the works of Samuel Beckett. The next writer is Doris Lessing. So Doris Lessing works are, the first one is The Grass is Singing, which was published in 1950. The next one is The Golden Notebook. So these two important works, the themes like colonialism, race, and gender are found in the works of Doris Lessing. The next writer is Muriel Spark. Okay, Muriel Spark's important writing work is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which was published in 1961. The themes like authority, individualism, education, we find in the works of Muriel Spark. The next writer is Kingsley Amis. His important work is Lucky Jim, which was published in 1954. Okay, the themes like satire of academia and post-war British society. So these themes we find in the works of Kingsley Amis. The next writer is Philip Larkin. His important works are The Less Deceived, 1955, which was published in 1955, The Whitsun Weddings, which was published in 1964, and the themes like post-war realism, disappointment, mundane life, mundane life. So these themes we find in the works of Philip Larkin. So these are the important writers and their works. I hope you understand the post-war period. Thank you very much.